So I'm going to be covering chapter 9 for muscle tissue and muscle organization. So the function of the skeletal muscle is that it produces skeletal movement, it stabilizes body position and posture. So every time you contract your muscle, you don't want to flop over, right? So then your body is constantly contracting to make sure that your back is straight. It also supports your soft tissues. It stores and makes substances throughout the body. And it also is for thermogenesis, which generates heat every time a muscle contracts. The reason why it does it because every time um contract, ATP is released as a byproduct. So muscles are made up of organs of multiple tissues. So it consists of skeletal muscle tissue, connective tissue, and these surround and anchor muscles into place like fascicles. And another thing is, for example, it's like adipose tissue too, because when you look at meat, you could see like white streaks, and the white streaks are due to fat. And then when you look at the structure of the skeletal muscle, it's made up of multiple parts. So it consists of the perimysium, which is the fascicle around the fascia around the fascicles. So it's like this inside right here. You look at it, it's just this inside. And endomysium surround each of muscle fiber. So this whole, like all these little muscle fibers inside is endomysium. Epimysium, right here is the little flap. So epimysium is the outside of the muscle cell. The inside, the little, like these little things are the perimysium. And endomysium is every single muscle cell. So just think of it epi, peri, and endo. Endo is an inside, and an epi as an epiperimeter. So epimysium is the outer layer surrounding the entire muscle, while endomysium is the surrounding inner layer. And perimysium is just like in the middle. So perimysium middle. So this is what it looks like. So endomysium's in the inside, perimysium surrounding on the outside. And this isn't showing the epimysium because you have to zoom further out. Okay, let's go through the connective tissues. That's why epimysium, you can see it's outside. That's why you see the clear part of the chicken has that. And the fascia makes up tendons. So, so a tendon is dense, regular or connective tissue and attaches to the muscle fascia to the bone peristeum. And the endomysium surrounds and continues around. And aponeurosis is a broad, flat tendon. So aponeurosis is right here, while the tendon right here, dense, regular connective tissue. And this is connected to peristome. And there's some connective tissues they order, like fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is the inflammation of tendons and muscle. So essentially what happens is um there's like pain and fatigue and stiffness in the joints. Nobody really knows how my fibromyalgia is created. It's an unknown cause, but people usually treat it with like Tylenol. Well, tendonitis is inflammation of tendons. So when you repeatedly use a joint, this causes a micro tear, and it can take a tear in the tendon, and it can cause like months or years to recover from. So these are the skeletal muscles and nerves. So every skeletal muscle fiber is actually connected to one nerve. So the it's like having a boss at work so you know which direction to follow. So and then some require more than others. Like sometimes you do certain things that requires more muscle units. Like the smaller the motor unit, the fewer muscle fibers is attached to it. And then so like for example, like your eyes and hands, you don't really need as much, but your legs, wait, I got that wrong. So There's one neuron and all the muscle fibers are connected to it. And recruitment is when they add more motor units to make the contraction stronger. So the smaller motor unit, it has more precise movement, such as your eyes, while large motor units would be your legs. And it requires a lot of blood supply as muscles contract, so you need a lot of energy. It needs a rich blood supply, glucose, nutrients, and waste removal. And it's also very long, and they cannot be replaced. Um, Muscle cells cannot reproduce, so what you're born with, you basically kind of have for the rest of your life. Yeah. Okay, let's go through the parts of it now. So it's made up of very different parts. Like this is the sacrolemma, the kind of like the plasma membrane. So it's like the outside right here. There's one nucleus, a few mitochondria for energy. The T tubules are these little holes. The middle is the transverse tubule, and the sides are the terminal cristae. And then there's lots of mitochondria, but the number depends on how much you need that muscle. And myoglobin is the oxygen storing protein in the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber. So it stores oxygen so when the mitochondria needs them. It's kind of similar to hemoglobin, a red blood cell, because it's bright red because iron needs to bind to oxygen. But but the reason why beef it's red, they said because when they drain the blood, but when you cook there's red, but when you cut out the muscles, it's the myoglobin coming out of the muscle fibers. And different animals have different myoglobin, and that's why beef is red but chicken is white. And then fish don't use myoglobin at all, so that's why it's white. And you see, because the beef is much bigger, like organism, it needs more oxygen, so that's why they're gonna have more myoglobin. Okay, and then the sarcoplasmic reticulum is this is what stores calcium, and calcium helps you contract muscle fibers. But if you don't have enough, it would take calcium from the bones to the muscles because your body prioritizes muscles over bones. And there's a series of tubes. So the enlarged ones are they're here like terminal cisternae of this sarcoplasmic reticulum, middle is the T tubule, and then the three structure is the triad. And myofibrils contain myofilaments. And myofilaments are cytoskeletal microfilaments. And protein filaments are made up of cytoskeletons that fill up the myofibrils and allow the muscle fiber to contract. So there's actually two types of myofibrils. There is the thick filament and the thin filament, which is myosin and actin. And they kind of like run along this whole thing right here. And the filaments are chopped off to different pieces and they're held through a sarcomere. And the sarcomere is like running in like a zigzag line to another sarcomere. Okay, so this is the model right here. It's a little bit confusing to memorize. So basically the Z line is right here in the middle. Z line as an outside, okay? And then H zone as think of heavy, and then A as an A plus, it's in the middle. So A's in the middle, H zone's right here. M line is, I think of it as middle line. So it would be like right here, middle line, A band, H zone, I band, Z line. Okay, and then these are the different microfilaments. They're all twisted around each other. You can see it's kind of like long, too skinny proteins, and they're all twisted and they have round club shapes that stick out. And some of them have 300 myosin proteins. And the actin filament is made out of actin proteins and it's twisted into a helix to form filament. And each actin protein has a binding site for myosin head to help contract the sarcomere. And actin proteins are covered with regulatory proteins, and regulatory proteins are important to control when contractions happen. Okay, let's go over the two. So tropomyosin is actually this long little thing right here. Troponin is this right here. Tropomyosin is the long thin strands that covers the binding sites on actin. It covers when when you don't want to contract your muscle anymore, it covers it up. But when you want to contract, what happens is the calcium. So you need to expose these sites, right? You need to expose the tropomyosin. So you would take calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it binds to the tropin, it pulls it off, and which pulls up the tropomyosin, and you can start using the actin filament to contract your muscle. And when you're done releasing, calcium is released, tropomyosin will recover, and the binding sites will be back. This. So calcium, we draw it out. And, see. Let's see if that's possible. Okay. So calcium's like, hi, I'm gonna come in. Takes this guy, and then boom, comes out. Tropomyosin here. Myosin biotides go in. Bind area. And then muscle starts contracting. Very important. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so there's some structural proteins. There is five. Let's go over. They're responsible for stabilizing the sarcomere. Ti- Titin filament. This stabilizes the whole sarcomere. It runs from the Z line to the other Z line. It is the largest protein in your body. Alpha actin. This makes up the Z line. Remember where the Z line is, guys? The Z line is right here, guys. Right? And between the I band is where, okay? So, where's the Z line? Let me find it. Like somewhere here. This line, I guess. So, let's just say it's this line. That's what it makes up. Myomycin, it makes up the M line. Nebulin is a special structure that wraps around the thin filaments and helps attach to the Z line. See, right here? It's attaching, guys. It's like, actually, these are kind of hard to remember, but they're like kind of like special structural proteins. See, it's wrapping around thin. So what I think of is when I try to remember this is here's some in mind to remember the awesome muscle needs remember needs dystrophin like needs defense. The awesome muscle needs defense. So that's how you remember all the structural proteins. So the awesome muscle need defense. Okay. Muscular dystrophy. This is when the muscle starts to fail. So your dystrophin protein stops working. So this guy stops working. What does dystrophin do? It links the thin filament to the cell sarcolemma. It's the one that stabilizes. When dystrophin stops working, muscle fibers rupture and die because every time you contract your myofibrils, your muscle fibers get damaged. Why is this? Because it's not attached, and when it's not attached, it's like there's no base for it. And muscular dystrophy is progressive and is a genetic defect created by the dystrophin protein problem. And there's DMD. This is only seen mostly in males. And the first signs is when the child can't come up with his hands because he has to come up with his hands because the legs are too weak and the child cannot walk. Neuromuscular junction is the synapse of connection between a neuron and another cell. The and then every muscle fiber is connected to one neuron, and the type of neuron that are connected is somatic motor neuron. And the somatic motor neuron is in the nervous system, and its job is to talk to muscle fibers. And the ends of the axon are axon terminal and the neuromuscular junction. So this whole thing is the neuromuscular junction. These are the axon terminals. This is the skeletal muscle fiber, the pink. Okay, and this neurical. Okay, so let's go through all the steps. Let's see. Okay, let's just skip to this. Let's just start with explaining the muscle contraction, actually. Okay, it's a little complicated, but if you can visualize it, it makes it easier. So what happens first is in order for your body to contract, it needs a signal from your nervous system. Your nervous system is made up of neurons. This sends an action potential. A nerve impulse goes down and it's propagated along a neuron. And then the skeletal muscle contraction. This is the first step, where it receives the signal from the muscle fiber across the neuromuscular junction, and it's telling the muscle fibers to do a muscle contraction. So, nerve impulse goes down here to the axon terminal. This end bulb is enlarged. This would trigger exocytosis of acetylcholine. So basically, let me explain this slowly. So action potential comes down. The voltage gated calcium ions. Let me draw this up. So the calcium ions are right here. It goes in. They rush in. And this is doing exocytosis. And this would release acetylcholine, which is these guys. They're like, okay, so we're doing exocytosis, we're splitting, we're doing this and that, and we become these guys. When it comes to these guys, the ACH, acetylcholine, attaches to the motor end plate, right there, and and then which initiates a laxation potential along the T tubules. If you want to stop muscle contraction, you stop acetylcholine and get rid of it. And then after contraction, acetylcholine gets pumped back into a neuron. Okay, so let me summarize this whole thing. Okay, easy. Let me delete this. Okay, so action potential goes down. These calcium vesicles come in. They're like, okay, we're going to do exocytosis of the or of us of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine goes and then it binds to the ion channels in the motor end plate, and this would just initiate action potential. So calcium comes in, and then exocytosis, and then it leads to the T tubules. And a neuromuscular junction disorder would be botulism toxin, which is created when the synaptic vesicles cannot contract anymore. So there's a bacteria called Clostridium botulinum that prevents the synaptic vesicles from releasing acetylcholine, which will stop muscle fibers, which will cause paralysis. And from there, with the T tubules, because you already got the acetylcholine going there, T tubules are here, and action potential travels along the T tubules and stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Calcium is stored in these guys. Calcium is released in these guys right here. And the T tubules, like, okay, like they'll come in. The action potential goes to this guy, which stimulates the terminal cisternae, which then goes to the SR. SR is like, okay, and then releases this calcium. It's like coming out, calcium comes out like that. And then calcium goes to the sarcoplasmum, which is the space inside the cell. So it starts like going around. It's like, okay. So the summary of this is what happens is the action potential goes to the T tubules, which goes to the terminal facility, which goes to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And then afterwards, what happens next is this skeletal muscle contraction, where the calcium basically binds. So after sarcoplasmic reticulum releases calcium, calcium binds to troponin. Troponin is right here. And then the troponin pulls off to make tropomyosin, which exposes myosin binding sites. So calcium comes into troponin, removes this, and then binding sites are out so that you can finally bind. And the contraction cycle, myosin heads are walking along to contract myofibrils. So the thin and thick filaments start to slide, the myosin heads walk them closer and closer. They're just going back and forth like this. And then skeletal muscle contraction. ATP hydrolysis is first. Myosin, it has ATP, cuts off the third phosphate group. ATP, has 3 phosphates, right? So it becomes ADP and P. When it releases this, it creates energy. Release of phosphate, releases energy. Crossbridge formations where myosin heads reach out to attach themselves to actin filament and they stick up straight. And then the myosin binds actin and thin and thick together. So what happens is, so the phosphate's gone, right? And then this thing can only hold 2 things. It only has 2 arms. And since it only has 2 arms, it lets go of one thing to hold another thing. And this one, the myosin heads reach out and attach themselves to thin and thick filament. And then for power stroke, the myosin heads rotate downwards, active filament move left, and when power stroke is occurring, ATP is released. So it's moving left right here. ATP is gone. After power stroke, you need to detach your myosin heads. And they don't like to be empty-handed, right? They only want to hold 2 things. ATP is being held, this is being let go, and it does ATP hydrolysis again. So what happens is ATP goes to ATP hydrolysis, broken down to ATP and phosphates, which will charge up the myosin heads. Myosin heads does cross-bridge formation by binding to actin filament, and as it does, it releases phosphate. Goes to power stroke, where myosin heads turn and bend and pull actin filaments a little bit further along, and as power stroke occurs, ADP is released. In order to end the power stroke, ADP must bind to myosin heads, and myosin heads will detach so they can do the whole process again. Okay, so for motor units, let's go through all this real quickly. You can either have or not have an action potential, and you kind of like, what happens is they vary in size. So depending on what you do, like if you pick up something light, you use motor unit 2 and contract 2 muscle fibers. But if you pick up something heavy, you use motor unit 2 plus motor unit 1 and contract 5 muscle fibers. So you recruit more muscle fibers as you could to contract together as you go and do heavier things. There's muscle tone. Muscle tone all have muscle tension called muscle tone. So even if you're standing, like okay, you're sitting down, right? But your muscles always constantly contracting, or else you're just gonna flop over. This is how it keeps you upright. There's always tension. So if you don't have that, your body will flaccid, which is like gone. Flaccid's like no nerve damage, no it's cut. You cannot contract. There are few muscle tone disorders, like flaccid paralysis, is a loss of muscle tone. And this can occur if you have a spinal cord injury. And when you have your spinal cord injury, what happens is you kind of sever the neurons in that. So all the muscle fibers become flaccid and cannot contract because like it kind of affects your brain. Your brain is like, okay, like what do I do? Like it's not connecting anymore, and then you lose your muscle. Spastic, it's too much muscle tone. It's like everything is like going at once. It's like, okay, like it's overstimulating. Your body's like, okay, you want to do this and this and that and then this and that. It's like basically that. So it's constantly contracting. And it's so crazy, like you just end up like being like, since it's always contracting, you just end up not being able to do anything. It's too overstimulated. Botulism, like no acetylcholine paralysis. Tetanus. This is similar to botulism. It kind of you contract all your body muscles at once with so much force that you break your own bones, ribs, and teeth. That is really scary. Okay, so let's go through all the muscle fibers. There is slow fibers, okay? Slow fibers, think as slow and steady. What do you use this for? Slow muscle fibers is used for long distance runner like marathon runners, and they are fatigue resistant. They can go for a long time before they run out of energy, and they have slow contractions and slow rate of ATP generation. Lots of myoglobin, lots of mitochondria. Why? Because they can go for a long time. Fast fibers. Fast fibers, think of not marathon. My bad. Fast glycocaolic. Think of fast but short-lived, quick contractions. You do it fast, but you don't live that long. Like live fast. Like life's too short, live fast. I don't know. I don't know how you guys want to do that. So it's not doing much cellular respiration. You kind of just use this like just speed running, or like sprinting or fast pace. Like you're not going to use as much because you only need to sprint for a little bit. So there's fewer capillaries, fewer mitochondria, not as much, not doing much cellular respiration. Fatigue very quickly because you get tired. Like you run, you sprint, you get tired. Intermediate fibers, think of it as moderate power endurance. Like you're balanced. You're intermediate, you're balanced, You're in the middle. You have myoglobin and you have mitochondria. You can switch between aerobic respiration and fermentation. It's like in between. So yeah. And it's used in walking and sprinting muscles. Okay, and then exercise skeleton. This one helps muscles fatigue resistant. So exercise is very important. Aerobic is basically you can exercise long periods of time. It converts fast glycol fibers to fast oxidative glycol fibers, and it has lots of health benefits, more mitochondria, more digestion. Because what happens? You need mitochondria for oxygen, right? When you exercise, it brings in the mitochondria into the muscle fiber. You can't grow more muscle fibers, but you can definitely change it by adding more mitochondria and capillaries. While strength training is you're building the muscles by widening the muscle fibers. Since you can't make more, it causes a little micro tears, which makes your muscles grow stronger. Okay, and there's steroids. Steroids, they mimic testosterone and simulate myofibril, but there's lots of downsides. So they widen muscle fibers. You can't make more, but look at how large they are. You can definitely widen them. But there's lots of side effects. Like men get impotency, cardiovascular problems, and then men testicles shrink because they're like, oh, you got this testosterone, like, why do you need me? Which causes impotencies and they can't get erection anymore. While female, they start to thicken, they look like men. Their voices drop, they develop beards, they get male pattern baldness, and their clitoris enlarges because it's embryologically related to the men. So, a lot of side effects. And also, since they're not doing it naturally, muscles can enlarge, but the tendon ligaments are weak. Okay, so for aging, so as you age, it gets harder to repair your skeletal muscle fibers. And sometimes fibrosis can occur when they have like heart problems, and when skeletal muscle fibers don't repair well, you don't grow new ones. And as you age beyond 30, like your muscle tissue is slowly being replaced by connective and adipose tissue. So by 50, you lose 10%. By like 80, you lose 40%. Fast and intermediate muscle fibers are gone. So if you want to preserve muscle, you want to do aerobic exercises to preserve it. So around 70, you just lose muscle mass overall. And the epimysium can help repair with some muscle damage, but but yeah, it's hard. But with cardiac myofibers, you can't really replace that. And you can't really replace skeletal muscle fibers too. Like, yeah. And in pregnant women, some smooth muscle fibers of uterus grows and divides as a pregnancy occurs and uterus largens. And then some organs, like the digestive organs, are capable of repairing. But I also wanted to add back like a little bit more information about the muscle fibers. So the intermediate fibers, they are kind of red, but not as red as slow oxidative fibers. More oxygen means more red, right? And they're not as fatigue resistant. They're kind of in between and just like walking. Okay, you just walk, you casually walk, that's what you need. Slow fibers, this long distance running, like that is intense. You don't get fatigued easily. Your meat is very red, lots of myoglobin, you have mitochondria. Fast fibers, you weightlift, like you do like a pump here and there. And it really like you don't have as much mitochondria, so your meat is not as red. You're not doing much cellular respiration. You don't need as much oxygen since it's very slow. It's fast paced, right? You don't need as much oxygen. So you make ATP by fermentation, where you do glycolysis out in the cytoplasm of the cell, followed by lactate at fermentation. Okay, and that is all for chapter 9. Bye.